Tale of Davinmore. Davinmore was the only known land to its inhabitants. It was a time when people only knew so much of the world, yet there was so much more than friends and enemies could imagine. But the land they had was sacred. The rough waters to the north began to worry the Davinmorians as they feared the protector of the sea was facing unhealable wounds in battle. The Davinmorians believed in protectors for the sea and the land, and no people of Davinmore ever ventured beyond sight of the distant northern waters. It was a mysterious place. The only place they deemed safe for water travel was Bird's Beak, a land protrusion that even when standing on the ground is narrow enough to distinguish the shape of a beak. The waters were shallow, and the Davinmorians could bathe and catch fish there all they wanted. Unknown to them, far east of Bird's Beak, was land that was full of chaos. This land was called Mid-Mortisk. Looking out on the waters to the east, one could not tell that there would be anything other than peace, and because of that, there was no need to disrupt the waters because the land of Davinmore provided everything. However, it was on one regular morning that the hero of our tale, while catching fish to later trade, noticed that in the furthest distance, off to the east of Bird's Beak, that strange shapes began to appear and slowly make their way in his direction. He stood there for a moment, studying the shapes without panic, until he saw the entire horizon line, lined with these unseen objects moving closer and closer towards him, and slowly fire began to light up, all in different intensities, sporadic, random, and though he knew the water would put fire out, these fires kept burning. At that time of day, which was just after early morning, our soon-to-be hero was the only one there to initially witness this event. He was unsure if he was actually seeing this event or if he was just imagining it. So he ran back to Cotriomo, the village that built up just before approaching Bird's Beak. He ran as fast as he could, waking up the sleeping villagers. "Everyone, wake up! There's fire burning on the water! There's fire burning on the water! Am I the only one who sees this?" The villagers grumbled. "Please," our hero said, "I need to know if I'm just imagining this." A young boy and girl eagerly wanted to look and took off running for Bird's Beak. Our hero hastily followed, and as they approached Bird's Beak, our hero noticed the fires were closer. He said quietly to himself, "In the names of our protectors, what is happening?" The children that ran off with him were pointing and expressing loudly, "Look! The sun can float on the water!" As some of the other villagers slowly awoke and arrived at Bird's Beak, they saw the sight as well. Unthreatened, they did not run or even have an ounce of panic. They were just more curious than anything else. But these fires were soon going to show no desire of welcoming arms. What the Davinmorians were seeing were exploration and destruction ships from that land far off in the east they never knew existed. The people of Mid-Mortisk had a history of strong exploration to their east because they were able to easily access various resources they wanted. However, they were running out of these resources, and the safest path of exploration was to head west. They too did not know if there was anything, but because of their encounters and battles with other people, they were on high alert, and were not going to die from this expedition, so they used every strategy they knew up until that point to defend themselves. They were not initially a vicious people, but they became that way, and unfortunately, the Davinmorians were not prepared. As the Davinmorians stood on the shores of Bird's Beak, standing as still as the trees, our hero had a sudden vision. He saw destruction mercilessness, and an image of very few survivors scurrying to save themselves. "We need to leave," he shouted spontaneously. "This is not a good sign." The other villagers just continued to stand there, as if they were in a trance, and did not react to his plea. He uttered again, "We need to leave. This is not a good sign." He rounded up the children who were present and ushered them back to the mainland. Even though they followed, they continued to face the eastern waters, as if they never wanted to return to the mainland again. Our hero made his way into the village, but by now the village was empty, as everyone was standing somewhere near the shore, gazing out at the fires. Our hero began to know there wasn't much time to act, so he grabbed the food he could carry. "Here, kids, take what you can carry." He made sure the children had enough food for them as well. He turned his head back toward the eastern waters. The initial line of ships was now filled in behind it, and he knew that even if there weren't going to be any more ships than that was still too many ships. The children did not want to follow, not out of rebelliousness, but because they were too entranced with what they had never seen before. Our hero tried everything to get them to move. "Come on, we cannot stay here." But they wouldn't budge, and they did not reply. It's as if they were possessed, under some kind of spell. Our hero stood for a moment, looking at the thin line of his fellow villagers standing like upright corpses gazing out without any reaction onto this spectacle that he felt now was no spectacle at all. He too joined them for one last look out onto the eastern waters, but once he turned his head away from them, that was the last time he'd ever see those villagers. Our hero headed north, as the Davinmore traditions claimed was the home of the protector of the sea. He felt that even though the waters may be impassable, and if he were to die, at least he would die in the protector's waters. He figured that from the line of ships he saw, that even if they extended that far north, chances are the rough waters would drive them further south, and if he stayed inland and kept moving, he would have a shot at escaping and saving as many lives as possible. However, he was not going to slow down. About 6 hours had passed, and our hero made it further north and inland, a safe enough distance from the impeding carnage. At one random point, he did hear faint screams and strange cracking sounds, and he of course hoped everything in some way would turn out all right, but he did not expect it. Our hero was soon approaching the next village, Trigwashan, which housed the map of northern Davinmore. He needed that map in order to find the quickest route to the northern waters. The map was located in the village library, but as he entered the village, it too was empty. He became instantly frightened, unsure if the visitors from the east had already arrived, or if someone also saw fire on the water and everyone went to see it. He approached the village with caution, and unfortunately, the library stood near the middle of the village without any protective places, so he had to be very careful in case he was surrounded. A wolf appeared from around the building, lightly trotting and sniffing the ground. Not necessarily a rare sight, but because of the desolation, it made its way into the village. Our hero took this as a sign that it was safe, and approached the library quickly. The wolf continued to sniff about, unfazed by our hero's movements, and our hero made his way inside the library. Eerily abandoned, yet ready for use, he found the map and quickly continued north. There was only one last village on the way before hitting the northern shores, and unfortunately, was built almost entirely on the coast. If our hero continued north, he would hit mountains, forests, and dense brush, and while it was survivable, there was no time to waste, and the quickest route was through While this village is settled on the shore, it is backed by a narrow cliff. However, the cliff top was also extremely narrow and exposed, meaning if anyone stood on it, it was highly noticeable. Our hero knew that there was only one thing he could do, use this cliff to see what the eastern waters looked like, and if he was seen, he had to make a run for it. He studied the map, and the fastest way to run, if he had to, was to run down the cliff, through the village, slightly onto the shore, and back around up the next cliff passing that led to the northern waters. There was no further outline of anything after that on the map, except the fact that there was water. As our hero approached the cliff overlooking he did not know what he would see, but he was prepared. He took a small bite of his food, tucked the map in his pocket, and took a few seconds before venturing into what could be his death. Before he got to the top of the cliff, he put his hands on the ground and he put his head down. He paused in that stance for a few seconds, thinking of nothing. Then he was ready. And as he got to the top of the cliff, knowing he was exposed, he took in all he could as fast as he could. And not probably 400 feet in front of him were a large band of these strangers from the other land beginning to climb up the cliff. Part 2. They instantly saw our hero, and when our hero looked down, the men Mortis were all bald with wide eyes, all intently staring at him. Their skin was bright, and they were all covered with strange markings in random places. They all looked the same, but different. When our hero's eyes met with one of theirs, our hero nearly instantly froze. And it was in that moment he understood why everyone was in a trance. These were the mind control people, he thought to himself. It was only a legend, a myth, a made-up story that some Davinmorians would tell for entertainment. Never taken seriously, it was too asinine to be truly real. But as our hero saw these people, he instantly knew the legend was true. But at the same time, he wondered why he did not become entranced like his fellow villagers did. And that thought alone snapped him out of the trance, which caught these men Mortis off guard, because no one had escaped their trance before. As soon as our hero broke out of the trance, he ran the path he planned, even though this large band of men Mortis was clearly in his way. However, they were so awestruck that they could not react fast enough to do anything about our hero running away. This encounter marked the beginning of the end of their powers, because for as long as their race lived, after this encounter, they could never figure out how our hero was able to escape their power. Our hero ran as fast as he could down the cliff, and every now and then looking out into the water to see what was there. The sight was nothing different from Bird's Beak, except most of the ships made it to shore. Luckily, this band of men Mortis he encountered were the only ones visible in this area, but he did not get his hopes up that these were the only ones around. He made his way down to the shore, made his way into the water a bit, and turned around to see where the band of men Mortis were. As he stood in the water, the men Mortis were standing still, looking at our hero. They were looking at him in the same manner the Cotriomo villagers were looking out onto the water at Bird's Peak. Our hero stood there for a second, knowing that he was going to survive. At the top of the cliff where he came from, he noticed it began to line with wolves. As he looked at them, he could not tell what the wolves were looking at, but it wasn't long before they slid down the cliff and began to tear apart the men Mortis, who in no way reacted. And while they were doing absolutely nothing to fend off the wolves, they still continued to stare at our hero. They did not scream or move. They just watched our hero stand in the water. Before our hero left to the northern waters, he stood there watching, confused, glad, and sad. Even though he had the feeling he knew he'd survive, he was still cautious with the wolves. Even though the wolves were merciless, our hero could not help but watch the event for as long as he could before making his final pass to the northern waters. Our hero ran as fast as he could. He was sure at this point no Mormon mortist would have come this far north, but he still did not waste time nor slow down. A few minutes after heading for the northern waters, he heard a chorus of howls that deafened his ears, and off to the eastern waters he heard a rally of faint, ghostly screams that expressed both pleasure and pain. In the distance he could hear the rough northern waters, and our hero began to wonder how he would escape out into the water. He did not know if he could find anything to float on, or what would even be available once he arrived at the northern waters, but he knew he had to get there. When our hero finally reached the northern waters, it was as rough as the legends had said, and there were no villagers, just rough waters as far as the eyes could see. Our hero went up to the shoreline, not caring how vulnerable he was presenting himself, and stood in the water. He dropped to his knees, water rushing past his stomach, but still kneeling as though nothing was happening. And he just stayed in that position for a few minutes, amidst the legendary rough northern waters. There was nothing around him. After a while he began to look around him, still kneeling in the water. He looked around to his left and right a few times, seeing nothing he could use to float out to the water. While the shore was long in both directions, he had no energy at this point to try and explore it. It was not worth the risk. Then suddenly, as he was looking to his left, he noticed a figure in the far distance on the shore. The figure was wearing a robe, and it had a cane and a tiny lantern, and it gestured to our hero by moving his hand, which said, "Come here! Come here!" Then the figure disintegrated. Our hero abruptly stood up out of the water and ran over to where the figure was as quick as he could. He kept his eye on the spot the whole time, and wasn't even thinking a thought of maybe this was a trick of some kind. When he got to the spot where he thought the figure was, he briefly looked around, and sitting on the beach was a wooden box. Inside the box there was a somewhat old piece of paper that said, "The one chosen by the protectors can calm these waters with their body and spirit. Kneel in the water until you are not afraid of being engulfed in it. It is then that the protector of the water will appear to you if you are chosen by the protector." Our hero felt that there was no choice at this point, and he did not believe he was the chosen one. But he kneeled anyway, and even though he was already in the water earlier, our hero was still afraid of the rough waters, not knowing if he would survive them or not. Without fear, he kneeled once again in the water, and he heard a voice. "Young Davinmorian, I am the protector of the water. Your land will no longer be Davinmore. It will be occupied by men mortisks. They are too large in numbers for you to waste your time, and much of your people have been lost. It is not your purpose to continue here." Our hero let out a spontaneous, "But why are you letting this happen then? Why didn't you stop them if you're the protector of the sea?" "Young Davinmorian, your human experiences are only for you as humans to carry out. It is up to you as humans to eventually come together peacefully, even if, unfortunately, you must rival one another before you realize that." Our hero continued to kneel in the water, pausing in silence. Then he heard laughter in his head. "Come now, your purpose continues. You did all you could. Your fellow villagers know that. They're looking at you now with appreciation." Our hero quickly turned his head around in all directions, hoping that they were around. But there was nothing. Then he sunk his head back down. The waters started to calm, but he still kept his head down, tired sad, unsure. As the waters calmed, he looked up, out onto the water, and to his left came floating a large piece of wood, and when it floated closer, it was an old door. Our hero looked around, still seeing nothing, deciding if he wanted to get on or camp out and scour the beach in hopes of something. But he realized that even if he dragged the door to shore, who knows if he would find anything else, or if the Menmortis would appear at any moment if he stayed. He was tired, and not wanting to keep watch, and if he was going to die, he'd rather die at least trying to get somewhere. Our hero already knew that Davinmore had essentially been taken over, and as much as it hurt him to leave his beloved homeland, he did want to try and cross these legendary rough waters that had now become calm. As the door started to drift by on his right, he got up and got on. Despite all his recent thoughts about staying in Davinmore, he knew that this door floating by was no coincidence, that it was a sign from the Protector. And it was no coincidence that these waters became calm. But perhaps, he thought, maybe these waters have grown calm every now and then, and we just didn't realize it. As he thought this, he was already stationed on the door ready to float away. Our hero was gazing into the water facing towards Davinmore, and when that thought left his mind, he looked up towards his land. He said quietly, "It pains me, but if I continued to place my feet on you, Davinmore, I would be forcing myself to do so. I have seen these legendary northern waters with my own eyes now, and I am on them, as if there was no legend at all. And maybe I'm writing a new legend, but I will never forget you, Davinmore. I wish I could have saved you sooner." Our hero was right not to stay. The Menmortis forces were strong and beginning to take all the resources possible that Davinmore offered. The only resource they inadvertently wasted was the fishing resource. Their ships and waste from the ships destroyed a viable food resource that would have saved many Menmortis at a later crucial point in their existence. But the Protector of the Sea knew this would happen. Over time, our hero's encounter with that large band of Menmortis was told time and time again by two Menmortis who managed to survive the wolves. What that band of Menmortis realized, but at the same time didn't realize at that time, was that our hero was to be one who would bring an eventual end to their power. It took some time, but eventually the Menmortis powers weakened over time, as well as eventually ceasing their barbaric yet intelligent ability of conquest. As our hero slowly floated away from Davinmore, he never took his eyes off the land he could see. And whether it was grace or punishment, not one animal or human appeared near any part of the shoreline as he drifted further away. Our hero thought how funny it was that he was the one now slowly drifting away, when not that long ago he was watching something he had never seen before drift towards him. He remembered the vision he had when he was looking out curiously at the eastern waters when the ships and fire first appeared, and until now he hadn't thought about it, but he thought, it must have been the Protector of the water looking out for me. Our hero was almost out of sight of Davinmore, and during the last moments before the land faded from his sight, our hero realized that whether or not it was the Protector of the Sea looking out for him the whole time or not, our hero felt he went down the right path despite all that happened. It was time. The very final moments of not seeing any land were happening very quickly. Our hero stood up abruptly, hoping by doing so he would see more land, but it did not happen. He wobbled a bit, but sat back down quickly, as it was not worth falling into the water to not see as much of Davinmore as he could. The last thing he wanted to keep his eye on was all of it. So he moved his head back and forth across all the land he could see until it all became water. Goodbye, my beloved Davinmore. I know I will never see you again.